All right, for one final time this summer term, we are officially rocking and rolling. Um, it is coming to my attention that I say that a lot, so consider this a farewell tour, if you will, for our time spent in Education 533. This project has been a lot of fun to complete. It's really been an incredible opportunity to think about where I can get better as a teacher and to have a roadmap to do it. It is all courtesy of the concepts and activities that I had a chance to learn and participate in this course. I do apologize. I am going to have my mouse on here. I will try not to get too distracted by it. But I will be having that to be able to kind of reference some of the materials in these slides and the information that I want to make reference to. I haven't had that in in past iterations, I guess I should say, but just wanted to make that apparent. But this is our final project for our course, and it is an instructional design project. And for this project, I decided to take on the challenge of fitting learning into time constraints. The instructional problem that I started realizing through it's been evident throughout the past few years was that there is just either too much content, not enough time spent actually doing the activities that we need to do, or a multitude of other influences that are making it difficult to fit all of the activities, all of the lessons, everything into the constraints of the school day and school year. Every single semester has ended differently than recent semesters. Mind you, I've only taught for about 6 semesters total now over the course of 3 years, but this is something that I do need to improve in as I continue my journey in education and being the best teacher that I possibly can. To solve this instructional problem, I decided to look into action mapping, which is an instructional design strategy that was developed and refined by Kathy Moore. It was officially published and made available to the public in 2008, and it has become a very prevalent instructional design tool that developers can use to make meaningful and actionable change for a instructional problem that they are noticing is pertinent. So, to define this concept and to define this strategy more so, it is an instructional design method that prioritizes performance over the transmission of information. We'll talk about this in a later slide, but this is coming directly from Devlin Peck and from Kathy Moore. They both contend that traditional instructional design models more so focus on the transmission of information, and information overload is a very frequent discrepancy that arises from this. Learners are given an excessive amount of information and not given or plentiful opportunities to actually practice the performance outcomes that are desirable. That is the whole point of instruction. Um, Action mapping differs in that sense that there are several set activities that learners will participate in to improve their abilities. And it is all streamlined toward the end goal. And that is actually where we will be starting with step one. Um, the first step in action mapping is to clarify the goal that for your learners. And we can use a formula to generate this goal. This was actually provided by Kathy Moore on her website. Um, and the formula is as follows. A measure that we already use will increase or decrease by a certain percentage by a certain date as people do something. We're going to go ahead and we are going to use that same formula in a later slide to describe the goal that I set to improve my instructional problem. But this is step one in the process. The stakeholders and the developers of the action map instructional design will get together and they will set a goal that is very specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, realistic, timely. It meets all the features of what we can call a SMART goal, to use that acronym. So step one, we need to set a goal. What exactly is it that we want our learners to accomplish? What do we want them to do? In the business world, this would traditionally be used if we notice a weakness in productivity, if we are not meeting a specific quota. In education, it is equally is applicable when we notice that our learners are not doing something that we need them to do or want them to do. Once we have identified what our goal is, we can start to set the actions that we want our learners to be able to do so then they can meet this goal. Um, a key feature here in this step is to identify, why is this not already happening? What are we not doing? How can we set these activities so our learners are doing it to meet that goal? And again, it is all entirely action based, as you can denote from the term action mapping. So we start to identify these activities that our learners can do in meeting that goal, kind of to reiterate what's happening in step 2. Step 3 is actually, we take a step back, which will make more sense once we see the model that I've developed and kind of look at action mapping as a whole in the upcoming slides. But those activities that we have set that are crucial for meeting that goal, that performance goal, a step back from that is actually practicing those actions. So the equivalent in a classroom would be formal assessments before implementing a summative assessment, and providing extensive opportunity for practice before requiring those actions to meet the goal. And they're all reinforcing our desired outcomes. Why did I choose action mapping for my instructional problem? I really loved the idea of it being a streamlined process that is everything in action mapping is all towards meeting that measurable goal that we had set for ourselves. Not that other instructional design models are not looking to meet a specific goal or that they deviate from this structure, but action mapping, it just really, it was straightforward. There's not a lot of guesswork. There is, of course, you can do future iterations where you change, or your goal might change and you might have different activities, or you just realize, those activities did not help meet that goal, let's do another iteration. But I really, really appreciated being able to see how that this is a roadmap to meeting your goal, and it's all going towards action. It's all action oriented. With that, we can kind of start to switch gears and talk a little bit about my story and why I felt the need to solve this instructional problem. What is the instructional problem that I have been experiencing? There's a few, but the one that came to my attention immediately, as you can see in these pictures, our students in my culinary arts classes and baking and pastry classes are just running out of time. We are not finishing tasks. As you can see, we can even take a little second here and scroll and check out this cleaning checklist. Despite the actions and despite the policies that have been in place to try to fit all of our learning into the schedules that we have, we're not completing this. It is not being completed. For lack of a better term, I'm kind of dancing around it, but it's been a failure. We are not able to get everything done that we need to get done. I am been so guilty of sending students late to other classes, having to reduce the amount of food labs that we do simply because cleanup, for one example, is just not getting done. And that is on me. That is on me as the instructional designer. So I realized that there's got to be something that I can do to hold myself accountable for this. I can have my students practice. I can have my students do perform activities that will actually meet this goal of getting everybody out on time, getting the things done that we need to get done in framework, following the scope and sequence, not having to deviate. And it's little changes that I realized would make all the difference in the world as far as being able to meet this impossible goal of actually trying to get everything done in the time that we have. So more so on the instructional problem that I have been facing, students are not completing the food labs that are set in our framework and the time allotted. Every single food lab that I do, I feel like there are students that are falling behind. Their food is still in the oven or on the stovetop when they need to go to their next class period. And as these labs are going to comprise the majority of the activities that we're doing in meeting essential standards, this is something that I have to solve. And not to mention, literally every single class will be affected by this problem as it arises. For example, if first period does not have a chance to finish their recipe, get their food out of the oven, get it put away, get cleaned up, do a reflection, that is going to directly affect every other class for the rest of the day. If first period does not clean or does not finish their recipe, second period is not going to have a lot of confidence to be able to do it. And definitely by third period, fourth period, fifth period, um, a mess might accumulate. Students go, well, I'm not going to clean that if they didn't clean it before me, which leaves me at the end of the day going, what happened? And not to mention, it's driving me freaking insane, as you can see by this ChatGPT generated image. That's me, by the way. That's me losing my mind. It looks like approximately 10:10 in the morning. Yeah, that checks out. That would actually be my planning period for last semester, so that's actually super funny. I did not notice that before. Here is my rendition of an action map. We're going to go through every single part of this map, specifically the activities that are labeled here. So the goal that I set was that lab completion will increase to 86% by June of 2026, assuming that we do this next school year. As students assume succinct roles, organize ingredients and equipment before cooking, meet pacing checkpoints, and clean while completing every single food lab. So these are the actions that are going to lead to us meeting this goal. And again, we're going to go through every single one of these in detail in later slides. I came up with the figure 86% because there are 7 food labs in any given class. 86% represents 6 out of 7. So the idea is that 6 out of 7 food lab groups will be able to meet this goal on time, because I understand it's never going to be perfect. I'm never going to get every single time all 7 food labs for all 5 periods completing all of the tasks. But I want to get to a point where I can, be sure that at least 6 of the 7 will be done, cleaned up, everything will be in order. So that we can move on and not fall behind in our curriculum. So the first action that we are going to talk about is the concept of mise en place. So mise en place is a French term that literally translates to everything in place. I think this picture does a really good job at depicting that. This prevents us from running all over the classroom during lab time and allows the students to actually participate in lab, being that they have everything already set up. So an example of this might be pre-measuring our ingredients the day before. Using this picture as a reference, I see we've got some tomatoes that are cut up, some cheese that's already pre-measured. It looks like maybe they're doing some prep work while they do it, but as you can see, everything is set up. And this will, if you do not have experience in cooking, this can be the difference between completing a recipe in an hour, having to run to the pantry and grab your flour. Oh, that's right. Shoot, the eggs are still in the fridge. I got to get those out. Oh, actually, I forgot. Milk's at the grocery store. I got to go do that. We can avoid that scenario and replace it with being able to cook something in 10 to 15 minutes simply by employing mise en place. So how are we going to practice this? Kind of taking a step back. So our action is mise en place. How are we going to practice this? The idea is that students are going to do guided mise en place for every single lab. So I will have to be diligent about looking at the recipe, realizing that, okay, we can measure this flour out the day before. We can get this sugar set to the side. We can cube up our butter and get it ready to go for our biscuits or our pie crust or whatever it is that we are going to make. Cool idea that I found on the internet that I thought was pretty awesome was have students actually do trials where they complete mock mise en place. So, okay, you got to get ready. We're making pancakes. What are you going to get out? And I have the students go. I orient them to their lab spaces, and they do their best to try to mise en place, to emulate a scene that we see in this picture here for making pancakes. So maybe they get their frying pan out, they get their utensils set out, they get their recipe pinned up, ready to go. They get their aprons on. They're all ready to rock and roll before they actually start cooking. They don't turn the oven on and then measure the flour and then put the butter in the pan and then go and measure their sugar. And then by then their butter's already burning and they have to stop. They get everything ready to rock and roll before they actually start preparing the food. The information that's required for my students to be able to do this is they need to be able to define what mise en place is. They need to know how to use it. They need to understand the benefit. They need to know why on earth they're doing it in the first place. So that is the first activity that is going to get us to meeting that goal. We're going to do mise en place for every single lab. So then on those lab days, they're ready to go. The second component to meeting our goal would be the establishment of a kitchen brigade system. If you're not familiar with a kitchen brigade, it is a kitchen system that was popularized by Auguste Escoffier, one of the founding fathers of gastronomy in terms of just the food production world. Our kitchen brigade can be helpful in several ways. It gives people a specific role that they have to fulfill, and everyone performing separate tasks, harmonizing to meet the end goal. That is the most efficient way to do things. Instead of having one person trying to do everything, or two people do everything while two people do dishes, everybody has a specific role that they fill. And ideally, they will change roles every single lab. I actually have a pretty good measure in place to be able to make sure that my students are doing that. I keep track of which students are the chef, or which students are the aboye or expediter, as we call it in the industry. And students will be needing to fulfill their roles for the duration of the lab, change roles as the preceding labs occur, and really focus on getting a well-rounded experience in every single role that they fill. Some ways that we can practice a brigade and implementing a brigade before we do it in lab is to, this is another cool one that I found on the internet. Maybe have students participate in an assembly line drill. So for example, let's say, this is my example that I came up with. Let's say we are making a croque monsieur sandwich. You're going to have one person that's getting all the ingredients ready, one person that's going to put the sandwich in the salamander, and then another student that's going to plate it, and then another student that's going to be cleaning the utensils that were used as they go. And it is a one-stop shop at every single step in the process. So every person's touching the sandwich one time, every person is completing the same task, and in that sense, I feel like this would be a really good practice for students to get, an idea about what this is going to look like when we are in the food labs. Another one would just be basic practice. So I like to do scenarios where I put a scenario on the screen and I ask my students, okay, what would the role be, or who would be assuming this role, who would be doing this in lab? So a scenario might be student seeks the help of Mr. Hamilton during lab. What role are they fulfilling? Well, if we use a kitchen brigade system, we would know that the expediter is going to be the communication link between the kitchen, the front of the house, and the chef. In terms of our classroom, the expediter would be the communication link between the lab station and me. So ideally, one person is doing that communication so that 4 other people aren't standing there while their sandwich is on fire because they're all like, help, we need help. We send one person to do that. The information that we required is for students to know what the roles are, know what they entail, and have some thorough practice in identifying those roles before they assume them in the lab and help us meet that goal of getting everything done on time. I really like the idea of pacing checkpoints. This is one action that I have fallen short on as a teacher, and that is setting checkpoints to time out lab procedures. For example, our dish will be in the oven by the 15-minute mark, and I have students set a 15-minute timer, or I set a 15-minute timer for them. Having that, it is motivating. You don't want to get in the habit of rushing. You want to provide quality instruction and quality lab experiences. But it is helpful to be able to have that point of reference to give you some motivation, and it's proven to work. It does work. This is something that we definitely can set. We can set pacing checkpoints for when it needs to be in the oven, when our dishes need to be cleaned up, when we need to be fulfilling our lab evaluation at the end of lab. We can practice this by conducting mini labs and having students meeting mini checkpoints. So for example, let's say we are going to have a mise en place lab. I will say by minute 5, your flour needs to be measured, and they can sit there and they can set their timer and try to measure their flour in the time that is allotted. Some additional practice would be able to recall the auditory and visual cues. So maybe I have a certain sound that I will play instead of me announcing it and yelling and catching everyone off guard and taking away their attention from their task. Maybe we decide to set auditory or visual cues, and we practice those before we actually get into the lab space. So I play the sound. What's that mean? Oh, it means we need to be done. We're moving on. New checkpoint. That checkpoint's already passed. Something like that I think would be very, very helpful. The information that our learners will need to know. They will need to learn how to operate these kitchen timers. They will need to learn how to recognize these visual cues. They need to know what they are before we can just implement them. So again, another stop in our progress toward meeting our goal. Last but not least, this is going to be pivotal. This is going to make all the difference in us accomplishing this goal. Is we got to start cleaning while we cook. I've noticed this. I like this little picture I got going on right here. This is very common, as you can tell from the pictures that I provided, and maybe you did it yourself. Which, if you did, you should stop. I'm just kidding. I'm so guilty. Do it all the time. My students will get into a habit of saving all the cleanup for the end. They want to focus foremost on making their food so that they can eat it and then leave. They kind of sometimes forget that dishes, you got to do those. I know when I was a kid, I was so guilty of this. I didn't really do my dishes much because my mom did them. She would make me do them, but the problem is I wasn't that bad of a kid. But it's an afterthought when you have that pie that smells absolutely amazing, or you just spent a week making your sourdough and now it's time to eat it. The last thing on your mind is a dirty saucepan that needs to be cleaned because the next class has to use it. So some ways to practice this. I came up with this idea. I thought this would be really cool. They might not love it immediately, but pre-dirtying the lab stations. So maybe I sprinkle some flour on the counter. Maybe I leave their sponge all full of water, and I leave a utensil out, and I orient them to labs, and I go, okay, you've got 1 minute. This needs to be cleaned and clear and ready to rock and roll for the next crew in 1 minute. Little mini like sessions as such, I think would be really, really helpful, as well as having kitchen checklists that they actually use. That is the idea, that they will actually use them, which that's on me. I got to start enforcing that. That kind of reminds me of maybe a not so fun thing that I might have to do is I might start docking some points. If your kitchen's not cleaned and it's a consistent thing, maybe this lab you're going to lose 5 points. Next lab, if you're doing it again, maybe you're going to lose 7 or 10. It may have to increase in severity. I don't like to take points away for example, we had a fire drill during our apple pie lab every semester. Actually, now that I think about it, seems to time up perfectly. How coincidental. But I might have to do it. It does not feel fun. I keep sitting back on that fact. It's not a fun thing to have to take points away from your kids, but we need to get this done. This needs to happen. So the information students will need, they need to have a point of reference to the cleaning expectations that I set. What does this look like before we move on to the next, before my next class comes in and has to do the exact same thing that you just did. So whether that's a checklist, whether that's a picture, that's actually a pretty good idea. Take a picture of what it should look like before and after. Implement the leave it better than you found it. This is a action that will get us to where we need to be. Some additional alternative methods to meeting this goal and kind of saving time that would be very helpful is the idea of employing a flipped classroom. This is actually a strategy that I started to understand more so with the help of my colleagues when we did our peer review session. Traditionally, I have taken full days to do demonstrations or to do lab evaluations. Maybe not a full day for a lab evaluation, but I set aside a lot of time in class to do these things. And I've noticed that it really does start to eat up our time that we have. Before you know it, it's a week away from winter break and we are not anywhere near where we are supposed to be. So by employing a flipped classroom, I might have my students do some of those tasks at home. I don't love giving homework, but if you think about it in a different way, it's not necessarily homework as much as it's still part of the curriculum itself. It's not extra work. It's all work that is going to specifically get you ready for class the next day. So an idea would be to, instead of spending a whole day demoing we could have had that day doing production. I would have my students watch a pre-recorded demonstration of me cooking it, to where they can come to lab ready to rock and roll, and we'll know who watched it. We'll know who was ready. We'll know who actually took the time to prepare for the next day, and kind of enforce that sense of accountability on behalf of the students. I still just keep going. There is just some part of me that's like, what about the kid who can't do it? What about the kid that has to go home and watch, their five brothers and sisters? It would take practice. This is something that we would have to gradually roll out, and see if that helps. So I wouldn't say that this would be the end all be all solution to it, but this is an action that we could add to our map to really help us towards meeting that goal. Really interested in applying that and seeing if that is something that will get us to meeting our goal. To reflect and kind of talk about some of the key takeaways of our project. First, kind of talk about the solution. Why do I feel like this is a viable solution for meeting this instructional problem of just not having enough time to get things done, or things aren't getting done on time? I really like the value that I find in this model is that every single activity is directly related to improving our existing problem and alleviating the effects of the problem. And the one thing about this, like having actionable solution to it, is that cooking is not just something that you're going to get better at, faster at, by watching videos, or by reading about it, or by studying flashcards. This is something that you have to do. So having actions that my learners can actually perform and get better at, that I think is going to really lead to us directly improving those skills that I want to implement to help us meet our goal. It's just something that just cannot be done through memorization. I can tell them 100 times to clean up their lab station, but unless I give them practice trials to be able to do so, and show them what it looks like and demonstrate it and have continual practice opportunities through mini labs or activities, it's not going to improve. So I really, really love that aspect of action mapping. It is actionable, hence the term action mapping. I had a lot of key takeaways when I was learning about this. One of the first key takeaways was what I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, was that if you are not very, very intentional and you do not peer review your instructional design and have people, key stakeholders, check with you and make sure that what you're doing is sound, you may run into the issue, which I myself as an instructional designer, teacher, have done before. You might focus more so on information than the actual results of what you're trying to get your learners to learn. So they'll have all the information, but they won't really have a way to put it into action. So you just have to be really careful of that. Action mapping kind of takes some of that away. The information is important, but it's not as important as the practice and making the actionable changes to meet your goal. I was initially kind of worried about this. I thought maybe I was going to change my plan. I was like, fitting learning under time constraints. Yeah, right. It's just never going to happen. But this really made me realize that even something as complex as meeting that challenge, it's doable with something like action mapping. And it is not an end-all be-all process. You might, or an instructional designer might, realize at the end of their project that, wow, okay, we set all these activities, here's the actions that we identified that were going to help us meet this goal. They did not. You can do it again. There's future iterations. You can do it again and see what else might work towards meeting this goal. So I really, really love that. Every single piece of information that I was able to reference in this presentation was with consideration to the work of Kathy Moore. Cannot take credit for any of these ideas. They were all generated based on the scholarship of Kathy Moore and Devlin Peck. He has an absolute just abundance of information to give to you as a pursuant instructional designer. And I used all of their information to really form my understanding of what action mapping is and how it is important. So specifically the pictures that were referenced in the action mapping in the steps for the slides, those were all taken straight from Kathy Moore, and a lot of the information that I presented to you was paraphrased from her scholarship and that of Devlin Peck. Just want to make that increasingly clear. This is not my instructional design. I did not come up with this. It's been a fantastic semester. Really had a I really had an amazing opportunity to reflect and try to become a better teacher. I just did a action research proposal, so my brain is kind of just thank you for bearing with me. But that is what I learned. That is what I took away, and I'm really looking forward to being a better teacher by thinking about this. I'm grateful to know that I can get better. There are ways to do. There are roadmaps to success for leading and implementing instruction. So very excited for that. Thank you for a great term. I really appreciate it, and yeah, have a great night.